Hi, my name is Dr. Jonathan Reisman. I'm making this video for you in Philadelphia in the US, in the state of Pennsylvania, which is where I live with my wife and child. I'm a medical doctor. These are the clothes that I wear when I go to work. We call them scrubs. I like them because they're very comfortable and I feel like I work in my pajamas, which is actually very nice. So when I get dressed for work, I wear this kind of outfit, not a suit and tie. That's something I really like about being a doctor, that I get to wear my pajamas to work. I work in the emergency room. I work in two different emergency rooms near the city of Philadelphia. One of them is in the city of Camden, New Jersey, which is across the Delaware River from Philadelphia. There I work in a pediatric emergency room, meaning I only see children. I work in another emergency room in rural Pennsylvania. Um, there I see both adults and children. That emergency room is very far from any large city, and it's a small hospital. And it's a very rural area with a lot of farms in Pennsylvania, and it's quite beautiful. It's in the Appalachian Mountains. And there I work in the ER as well. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of patients with coronavirus infections, or as we call the infection, COVID 19. In both the emergency rooms I work in, I have seen some coronavirus patients, though not too many, and most of them have not been that sick, thankfully. I'm originally from New Jersey, and I trained in my medical training in both internal medicine and pediatrics. Internal medicine just means general medicine for adults, and of course, pediatrics means general medicine for children. I did both of them, which is sort of like doing a double residency where I trained in two different specialties. But now I just work in the emergency room, which I very much like. I also do some writing, and I write about the human body and different parts of the human body. And I heard that your educational curriculum lately is involving a study of 11 bodily systems. I'm working on a book right now that I hope is going to be published next year. And in that book, I go through many different systems in the body. And I'm going to share some of that with you today. I have done other writing in the past, but this is my first book. I have written several articles that have appeared in publications here in the US, like the New York Times and the Washington Post and Discover Magazine. And in each of those, I've written about different parts of the body as well, different bodily systems. I also, before I get into details of bodily systems, I also do some charity work in various parts of the world. In the past, I have volunteered as a doctor, as a physician in the city of Calcutta, India, and I continue to raise money for a charity that is in Calcutta that gives health care to some of the poorest people who live in the slums of the city and also on the sidewalks themselves. And when I was a volunteer there, I visited a lot of these communities where people live on the sidewalk, live under a bridge, live beside a river in a slum encampment. And it was a great experience, and maybe I helped some people a little bit, I'm not sure. I wish I could help more. I also did some volunteer work as a medical doctor in Penang, Nepal, and that's when I was doing that is when I last visited your school. I was there twice in 2016 on my way to Penang from Kathmandu, and then when I had returned to Kathmandu from Penang. In Penang, I worked in a clinic with one other doctor who was from New Zealand. We saw patients there who were foreigners trekking in Nepal, the Annapurna circuit. We also treated their porters who were carrying their stuff, their guides, many of whom were local Nepalis. We also treated local people who live in Penang. And we treated some other Nepali tourists that were also trekking. And it was a great experience. At the end of it, I made it to the top of Throng La, the pass, and then came back down. And then I came to your school to visit a second time. That was 4 years ago already, and I haven't been back since. And I guess I don't see myself getting on a plane very soon, given the coronavirus pandemic. I'm just trying to stay safe here with my family, and I hope you guys are being safe also. I do want to talk about some bodily systems now. Now, you're going to learn about 11 of them. You can break body systems down in different ways. When we talk about systems of the body, it's important to remember that all the systems, of course, work together inside of each living human being. And each of them has to work correctly, and they have to work in harmony with one another to make up the entire organism. Each human body is a collection of systems, or at least that's one way to break it down in order to understand how the body works. We're going to break it down by system and talk about each body system. But it's very important to remember all of the body systems are linked together. None of them actually work in isolation, or they wouldn't work at all. It's all or none. They all have to work together, and if any one of them fail, then the entire organism fails. In this way, the human body is very similar to the natural world, where all the different species of plant, fungi, animals, bacteria, and other microorganisms, they all work together ultimately to comprise the entire ecosystem. And if any of them were to disappear, there could be some fallout, some repercussions for the other systems, and an ecosystem could collapse if the right keystone species is removed. In that way, there's an ecology of the natural world where we study how each organism in the natural world is connected to other organisms, whether it's a species of predator that eats the species of prey. Obviously, those two species are very intimately linked, but every species is somehow connected to every other species in the web of life in any given natural setting. And there's an ecology of the natural world in that way when you take a step back from the biology of an individual organism and see how various organisms are linked together. That is ecology. Similarly with the body, we can step back from any one organ or any one organ system or bodily system to take in the ecology of how the systems are working together. Some are intimately linked, like the heart and lungs. They're packed together in the chest. Others are more distantly linked. Some are linked in ways that we still do not understand. So we're still learning about the ecology of the human body and the ecology of our systems. The first system we're going to talk about is the circulatory system. Now, the purpose of the circulatory system is to bring blood to every distant corner of the body, every single bit of our flesh, every single bit of tissue, and every cell that makes up our body must get fed blood in order to live. Once the blood stops flowing, our cells begin to die, almost like plants growing in the earth that just becomes dry like a drought. Once the water is shut off, those plants will wither and die because there's nothing feeding them. In the same way, when blood is turned, the flow of blood stops to any part of our body, that body's in serious trouble really fast. So bringing blood to every part of the body is the job of the circulatory system. Blood is the most basic ingredient for our bodies to continue living. It flows to every organ, every body part, every cell is fed blood, and it allows it to function. Now, blood brings oxygen, of course. Blood also brings other nutrients like glucose, which is the currency of the body's function. Glucose is the fuel for the body's fire, like wood is a fuel for a fire in someone's stove that keeps their house warm. The fire in our bodies that keeps us warm and that keeps functions of body parts happening, that keeps all the organs and body parts doing their job. Glucose is the fuel for that fire. and blood is the vehicle through which glucose is transported to all of the body's parts. Now, it's sort of like a plumbing system. The circulatory system is like a plumbing system where water, or in the case of our circulatory system, blood, is pumped through pipes like fresh water into a house. Every sink faucet, every shower head, everywhere fresh water is coming out, you need that water to be under pressure. Otherwise, you won't get a good spray of the water through the shower, or it won't come out of the faucet with any force. So you need it to come under pressure, and that's where the arterial part of the circulatory system comes in. These are the arteries. Now, blood flows from the heart into the arteries, and that's how the circulatory system feeds fresh blood with oxygen, glucose, and other nutrients to all the body's parts. Now, after all the body's parts and cells and tissues use the blood, take the oxygen, take the glucose, use it to do their daily functions that they do as part of the entire body. Once the blood is used, it drains back through the veins, just under gravity. That's not under pressure, it just flows back, just like the waste from a house, from a toilet, from a sink. Whatever runs out of the house doesn't run under pressure like the fresh water came into the house. In the same way, blood comes to a cell under pressure to push it through all the pipes, to get it to all the organs, and then it drains under gravity through the veins. So that it comes in the arteries, goes in the veins. And where does it go back to when it goes through the veins? It goes to the heart. The heart is where blood starts its journey, and it starts in the heart. It gets pumped into the aorta, the body's largest artery. From there, the arteries branch to infinity to feed all the trillions of cells that make up our body. And then it drains back through the veins into the biggest veins, like the inferior vena cava and the superior vena cava, which both drain into the heart. And that's the journey of the circulatory system. The heart is what creates the pressure, like any plumbing system for a house. You need the fresh water or the fresh blood to come under pressure, and it does, thanks to the heart. The heartbeat pushes the blood and keeps the pressure high. What's in blood? Blood has so many things in it, which is why we can take a sample of a patient's blood, send it to the lab, and do hundreds or even thousands of tests on the blood to measure different parts, different components that make up the complex fluid that is blood. Blood is so varied in its composition. There's not only oxygen, and there's not only glucose. There's various kinds of protein. There's cells like white blood cells, which help the immune system and helps our body fight off invaders like microbes, bacteria, fungi, parasites, amoeba, even prions, viruses too. Can't forget viruses. So the white blood cells in our bloodstream helps to fight off all the microbial invaders. And then there's platelets, which help us clot. And it's really good that blood has the ability to clot. Now, when clots form in the body, it can be very dangerous. In fact, many diseases that kill people, like heart attacks, strokes, pulmonary embolism, which is a blood clot in the lungs. These are all caused by blood clotting, because when blood clots, it blocks itself and it can no longer flow to some organ. Now, if that organ's a brain, we call it a stroke. If that organ's the heart itself, we call it a heart attack. And if that clot goes into the lungs, we call it a pulmonary embolism, but they're all clots. Now, clotting is so dangerous, obviously, but if our blood didn't clot, we would also be in a lot of trouble. Every time you get a paper cut, you could bleed to death. Every nosebleed, you could bleed to death if your blood did not clot. The trick is blood has to clot at the right time, and it has to not clot at the right time. As long as you get that perfect balance, your circulatory system will work very well. And the balance in the circulatory system is so important, just like balance in so many other systems. The next system we're going to talk about is the skeletal system. Now, the skeletal system is all the bones that make up the body. There's over 200 bones in the entire body. The biggest in the human is the femur. The femur is inside each of our thighs. It is a very large bone, and it takes a very great force to break it. But I've seen patients who have unfortunately suffered that force. I once saw a 4-year-old who was skiing in Colorado, a state in the western United States. He broke his femur bone. He was in a lot of pain. I also saw some old patients who fell and broke their femur. It takes a lot of force to break it because it's the biggest bone. The smallest bones in our body are the 3 inside each of our ears. There's the stapes, the malleus, and the sclera. And those bones help us hear sound. That sound waves that are coming through the air make those 3 bones vibrate, and that helps us to hear. But still part of the skeletal system because it's bone. We often talk about the musculoskeletal system, which includes the muscles, tendons, ligaments that hold the bones together. If all we had was bones, we would just collapse into a pile of bones. The bones have to be held together, and they're held together by a very fibrous material like ligaments and tendons. Now, the difference between a ligament and a tendon is that a ligament connects bone to bone, and a tendon connects muscle to bone. So the way that we move our skeletons is because muscles are attached to them. And muscles only do one thing. They contract. So they shrink in length. That's all. Every muscle in our body, that's all it does. It shrinks in length when it contracts, and then it relaxes. And then it shrinks in length when it contracts, and then it relaxes. Now it's just a matter of what 2 bones the muscle is connected to, and it pulls them together. And that's how every one of our muscles works. The next system we're going to talk about is the digestive system. Now, the digestive system begins in the mouth. The digestive system is how our body takes food, edible substances from the world around us, and we incorporate them into our own body. That's how basically we continue living. And if we stop eating, eventually we will die because our body needs to be constantly refreshed by new food. There's a saying, you are what you eat. And it's true biologically as well. What you eat becomes you. So your flesh and bone, everything that makes up your body was created with the raw material of the food that you eat. And also the air you breathe, but mainly the food. That's where most of the nutrients come from to build us. That's where the building blocks come from. So when we eat, when we use our digestive system, it's a way of taking food and incorporating it into our body, breaking it down so that we can absorb it, breaking it down into its most basic building blocks so that we can then build human flesh with those building blocks instead of what they were, which was the fruit from a tree, the flesh of another animal. We break it down to building blocks and then we build ourselves out of it. Now the digestive system is how we break it down. It starts in the mouth. After the mouth, it goes to the throat, then the esophagus, down to the stomach, then the small intestine, large intestine, and then it comes out the other end. The digestive system is like a long tunnel that begins in the mouth and ends down there. And through that snaking tunnel that goes through our bodies, food is brought on the path, through that snaking path, through us, many, many feet long. Can take a few hours to a few days to get all the way through. Depends how constipated you are, I guess. Now, as it goes through us, through that tunnel, through our bodies, from mouth to anus, we take from it what we need. We take from it the building blocks we need to build ourselves, the nutrients, the proteins, the carbohydrates, the fats. We take what we need and we get rid of the rest. And we put a little extra waste into it as well, like the color. The color of stool comes from our body breaking down red blood cells. So red blood cells from the circulatory system, the little billions of cells that are in our blood that make it red and that carry oxygen to our cells. As we break those down and make new ones in the constant turnover of our bodies, we put the waste from that process into our poop, and it makes it brown. So there you go. The next system we're going to talk about is the renal system. Now, renal is the kidneys. The kidneys are a very important organ. They receive blood from the circulatory system and they turn it into urine. That's the magic trick of kidneys. They take blood and they turn it into urine, and that urine flows from the kidneys into the ureters, into the urinary bladder, and then through the urethra and out of the body. It is one of the body's forms of excretion, the liquid form. The other one's the solid form. If that solid form becomes liquid, then you have bad diarrhea. Urine is always liquid, except when it makes a stone, which really hurts, and I see a lot of people for kidney stones. The main job of kidneys is to balance the water and salt in our bloods, in our bloodstreams. Now, our bodies are salty, even though it seems like all water in our life is fresh water without salt. The water we drink, the water we cook our food in, the water we wash our bodies in, the water we put on our plants to make them grow. This water is always fresh. There's no salt in it, or at least very little salt. But inside our bodies, we are salty. We have all our blood and all of our other juices and fluids and tissues are about as salty as a pretty salty soup. And the reason that we are salty, even though we live in a world of fresh water without salt, saltless water, is because our biological ancestors came from the ocean. All life on Earth started out in the ocean, or so I've read. Now the ocean's quite salty. So over millions of years of evolution, as our ancestors evolved the ability to crawl out of the ocean onto the land, we still carry the ocean and its saltiness inside of us, which is why everything inside of us is salty. And we have the kidneys to thank that our ancestors could ever leave the ocean at all, because the kidneys and the renal system is how we carry the ocean with us, inside of us. And if we didn't do that, we couldn't live here on dry land in the freshwater world that we do. It's the kidneys that keep us salty by taking blood, turning it into urine, and sending that urine out through the urinary tract, which is part of the renal system. Now, of all the bodily fluids, I think urine's the most interesting because of that fact that it helps us carry the ocean inside of our bodies. So even if you live very far inland, very far away from the ocean, as you do in Nepal, in Kathmandu, I actually live pretty close to the ocean here in Philadelphia, but not on the ocean itself. So we have kidneys to thank that we can live out of the ocean and so far from the ocean. The next system we're going to talk about is the respiratory system, made up of the lungs and the airways. Now, the throat is where the airway starts. We breathe in air through the same hole in our face that we eat through, the mouth. Food goes in there and air goes in there. But in the throat, food and air really have to take different paths. We have the esophagus, as we talked about in the digestive system. That is where food should go. And we have the trachea, which is the biggest airway, the start of the respiratory tree of branching airways. The trachea is only for air. Do not get food or water or anything else in your trachea, or your body will let you know that you did, because it will start coughing a whole lot. If you've ever had food or drink go down the wrong pipe or go down your windpipe, that means it went into your airway, which is never a good idea. But coughing is a good system, really, because coughing is how, when something does get into the airway, food or drink or saliva or something else, perhaps vomit, when a patient vomits, they sometimes can inhale some of the vomit into their airway. That's called aspiration. Coughing is the body's protective mechanism because That stuff does not belong there in the airway. So your body coughs as a way of pushing it out. Every time you cough, you're pushing air and whatever other goo got into your airway but doesn't belong there. You're pushing it out of your lungs. That's one of the way that your lungs clears itself, the way that your respiratory system clears itself. There's another way called the mucus elevator, which sounds like a great elevator, doesn't it? There is a constant flow of mucus out of your lungs, and it brings all the garbage that doesn't belong in there out with it. It's like the mop, and it's doing housekeeping in your lungs and your airways, and it's bringing out all of the dust that you inhaled, smoke that you inhaled if you're a smoker, other things that got in there that don't belong. The mucus elevator takes it and brings it out of the body. The respiratory system is how we extract oxygen from the air. When every time we take in a breath, the atmosphere pushes its way into our lungs, and we take from it what we need. So we take oxygen out of the air into our lungs. Into the body, we absorb it, and we get rid of carbon dioxide, which is the waste product of the glucose fire burning inside of our body. We have to get rid of the CO2, just like a house needs to get rid of the smoke from a fire, has to go up the chimney and out. So the CO2 that our body has to get rid of goes into the lungs and goes out when we breathe out. In oxygen, out carbon dioxide is the basic function of the respiratory system. The next system is the lymphatic system, which is a very poorly understood system, perhaps the least known of our bodily systems. The lymphatic system consists of lymph channels. It's basically the gutter of the human body. So as blood constantly flows out from our heart towards all the tissues, most of it drains back through the veins, but there's always a little bit of fluid left over that didn't quite make its way back into the vein, kind of found its way out of the blood vessel and ended up sitting in the tissue there. But it needs a way to drain back that's not through the veins. That's what the lymphatic system provides. It provides a way of draining everything back that didn't make it into the veins, draining it back through lymph channels. If the fluid of lymph is quite white. I once had a patient with a lymphoma, which is a cancer of the lymph system. His abdomen was full of lymph fluid, which was white and looked like milk. We call that chylous ascites. Ascites is when there's fluid in your abdomen. Chylous is when it's made of lymph. And I had to take a big needle and take out some fluid from his abdomen. And when I came out into my syringe, it was white like milk. The next system we're talking about is the muscular system. Now, we talked about this in the skeletal system, so I apologize for repeating. But as we know, the muscular system is the muscles that help our skeleton move, that helps our bodies move. Every movement that we've ever made, every movement of my lips during this talk, every time I move my head, I blink, or I move my hands, every movement that any of us has ever done from even before we were born, when we were inside our mother's womb, to every movement that we make throughout our lives, it happens because of muscles. Muscles move the bones that make up our skeleton, and our brain moves the muscles because that's where the impulse to move starts. When we want to move, it starts with the thought or the desire or the push to move in our brain. Sends an electrical signal through nerves, and it goes to the muscles. The muscles run on electricity, and that goes for the heart muscle too. Muscle that moves the skeleton and heart muscle all moves on electricity, shocking the muscle into contracting each time. The next system is the nervous system, which is the wiring of the muscle system. The nerves are a branching system that begins with the thickest nerve in the spinal cord, right at the base of our skull. The spinal cord comes out like a large root from a cauliflower. If our brain is the cauliflower, the thick stem of the cauliflower is the spinal cord. And when the spinal cord goes beneath the ground, or when the stem of the cauliflower goes beneath the ground, it's like the spinal cord going down into the spine and branching off into a million little roots that go into our arms and legs and to innervate all the skin so that we feel things and so that we can move things. So there's input and there's output from the nervous system. Input is sensory information. Every time we're touched, it sends a signal through the nervous system, through wires. When you touch your finger, that the feeling of that touch is transmitted through wires in the finger, up the arm, to the shoulder, into the spinal cord, and then up to the brain, where it connects to the parts of the brain that make us aware that we're being touched. The nervous system is the electrical wiring of the body. The next system is the endocrine system. Endocrine system consists of many glands that are throughout the body and that secrete messages into the bloodstream. Now that's another function of the circulatory system, is to carry hormones and other endocrine messages. Hormones are messages basically, and the blood carries them from the gland that secretes them to all the organs where they act. There's a thyroid gland at the base of our neck. There's a pituitary gland a few inches back from this point between our eyes. There's a pineal gland in the very center of our brain. There's adrenal glands on top of our kidneys. There's testicles. There's ovaries. These are all parts of the endocrine system. Even the pancreas is an endocrine organ. It secretes insulin and glucagon and some other hormones. Insulin is a hormone as well. The next system is the integumentary system, which consists of our skin. Now, even though I evaluate a person and all their organs whenever I evaluate them, I really only interact with their skin. When I feel their abdomen for the abdominal organs, all I feel, I put my hands on their skin and feel the organs through it. Or when I put my stethoscope on someone's chest to listen to their heart, that stethoscope only touches skin. I never actually can touch the heart, of course, though I did once when I was a medical student. I was working with a cardiac surgeon, and he needed me to hold the heart just an inch to the left. So I reached my hand in after cleaning it and putting on sterile gloves and gown and mask, etc. I pushed the heart 1 inch to the side so that he could keep sewing as he was doing. But usually I can't touch the heart. All I touch is the skin. And we know our own faces, really. We know the shape of our own faces. The shape of our own faces, and we know the shape of our loved one faces, our friends and family. The shape of a face depends on so many things. The bone structure of the face, the muscles, the fat, the other tissues, the cartilage that make up our ears and make up our nose. But on top of all of it is skin, and that's all we really see when we look in the mirror or look at people we know. All right, we can see teeth too. But even the red inside of our mouths and our tongue, that's skin too. It's just folded in on itself. Eyeballs are also not skin, but our eyelids are skin. And all the facial movements that we do are muscles pulling on. When we make an angry face, muscles are pulling on the skin to do that. Angry face, happy face, blah face. All that are muscles pulling on skin. It's a good system. The last system we're going to talk about is the reproductive system. The reproductive system is how the human body makes more of itself. That's the purpose of the reproductive system. The reproductive system doesn't actually help each individual human being survive. It doesn't help us. But it does make more human beings so that the species can be continued. The testicles of a man make sperm. The ovaries of a woman make eggs. When sperm and egg meet, it forms the first cell of a human body. That cell then grows into everything about us. And it becomes all of the parts of our body, including the food that we eat, of course. That one cell can grow into trillions of cells, which is how we become our bodies. But every body has a beginning. Every human body begins with the reproductive system of two other people. And that's because sperm and egg come together. It's sort of like pollen on the tree. The wind blows pollen from one flower and it latches onto another, or an insect brings the pollen from one flower to another. That is sort of like the sperm and the egg meeting and forming a new child. Thank you so much for listening to this talk. I wish you guys the best, and I hope to see you again soon in Nepal, Kathmandu, or in Philadelphia. You're welcome anytime. Bye-bye.